There we go. Perfect. Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our first class as the Adult B'nai Mitzvah. So you just had the Hebrew class with Diane, and now we're going to start talking about prayers. Many of you had my class, Invitation to Judaism, where I talked about prayers generally. So one of the things I'll be doing in this class is kind of reviewing some of that, but also going into more detail about the prayers and their meaning as a way sort of to prepare you for leading the services. So good morning. So let me start by sharing the screen here. I want to show you. Um, okay. So first of all, this is the schedule of the class. Hopefully you got these handouts. I think I sent them out by email. So this shows when we're meeting, all the dates that we're meeting. The things in red and green are special events, blue, special event. The JCC Book and Arts Festival this year is all going to be online, obviously. You can go to the JCC website to see what they're offering there. It talks about where Hanukkah is going to be. And many of these sessions will just be the 9 o'clock Hebrew class, and I won't be joining you for these different sessions over here, but I will be coming back in to talk about some things about the Torah portion that we'll be reading for the Adult B'nai Mitzvah service. And then I included some other holidays and so on, and the service is going to be on May 22 at the end. So this is kind of the schedule of the class. Wanted to show you that. And now we can take a look at today's class about Jewish prayer. How is everybody doing, by the way, so far? Everybody good? Okay. Okay, so so as you know, there's this challenge, which every religion has, but in Jewish tradition, we have two Hebrew words that sound somewhat similar that kind of describe this challenge kind of beautifully. And that is keva and kavanah. So keva is the Hebrew word for fixed, and it refers to the fixed prayers, the prayers that are found in the prayer book. And kavanah means intention. And the idea is that you want to pray with intention. You want to say what you mean. If you're talking to God, you should know what you're saying and say what you mean. And that's speaking with intention, kavanah. So we describe this tension between having a fixed liturgy, keva, and intention, kavanah, is this these two Hebrew words that sound kind of similar. The truth is, as we know, you can pray anytime you want to from the heart. You can, your own individual prayers. If you're about to take an exam, or you're going for an important interview, or you have some meeting, business meeting, and you're worried and you want to pray to God and say, give me strength and give me inspiration, whatever, you can do that. That's perfectly Jewish, right? And pray from the heart, whatever you want to say. That's your own individual prayer. The reason for praying as a community is to kind of maintain that link. I analogize it to exercise, which I'm very bad at. If you, if you don't have an exercise partner, at least the I5, or dieting, for instance, dieting's the same way. If you don't have a dieting partner or an exercise partner, a group that you're responsible to, it's very easy not to do it at all. Right? But when I know that every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 9 o'clock, I need to meet so-and-so at the gym, right? Then I can't stay in bed or whatever else I want to do, watch TV. It's like, he's expecting me to be there. I have to be there. So it forces you to do it on a regular basis. And when you pray, when you exercise on a regular basis, that's what gets your body into shape. When you diet on a regular basis, that's what helps you lose weight. Right? If you get off the wagon, you stop doing it on a regular basis, you get very bad at it. And the same thing is with prayer. When you pray on a regular basis, it keeps you in shape, right? And it helps you to focus, right? That's one thing. And also, in prayer, if you're getting together as a group, there's strength in numbers. There's reinforcement in numbers. It's not just you praying alone with a bunch of other people all engaged in the same project. And so that gives you more strength, encouragement, and reinforcement for what you're doing. But once we come together to pray, right, then we do want to have words that we agree on that we're praying. Otherwise, it's just a chaotic mess. Everybody's saying their own thing and it's a big mess. So that's where we need to have fixed prayers. And that's where this problem comes in of keva versus kavanah, the fixed prayers versus praying with intention. Now, as you probably heard me say in the last year, if you took my class last year, Jews and Christians in Europe knew about each other and interacted with each other, right? Not always well, but sometimes helpfully. And so one of those times was Martin Luther. I don't know a lot about Christian history. I just know a little. I know enough to be dangerous. But I do know that Martin Luther complained to the Catholic Church, and he nailed his 99 Theses to the door of the church or something like that. And one of those 99 complaints was, why do you continue to pray in Latin when nobody understands Latin? It's a dead language, right? If you're talking to God, you should pray in a language you understand. Let's pray in German. He was a German scholar. And Jews who lived near Protestants got that message also. And so the early reform movement in Judaism said, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. When you're talking to God, you should know what you're saying. Let's pray in the local language. And they translated the prayers into the local language and didn't stop praying in Hebrew for the most part. I grew up in the reform movement, and the original prayer book in the United States had like maybe 10 sentences that were in Hebrew in the whole book. The rest was English. That's just how it was, right? So they also shortened the service because Protestant services are about an hour long on Sunday, and a Saturday morning service in the Jewish world is about 2.5 hours because we have a lot of different prayers that we do. So they just chopped out a bunch of stuff wholesale, right? They cut the service in half and made it an hour long. So they cut everything down. They did most of it in English. That was their response to this keva kavanah problem. Our movement, one of the reasons our movement got started was we were reacting against those radical reformers who, threw the baby out with the bathwater. So we said, look, Jews have always prayed in Hebrew. That's the language of our people. It's the language that Jews pray in all over the world. If you take that away, we won't be connected to anyone else, any other Jewish community in the world. We need to continue to pray in Hebrew. And by the way, you can't just cut out half the service. So we left the structures of the prayers in, and we kept the prayers in Hebrew. But we did, because we were modern, we wanted to be sort of modern and enlightened. We did tinker with some of the wording of some of the prayers to make it a little more appealing to a modern sensibility. Some of the tinkering in the last few decades, for instance, have made some of the prayers egalitarian. This I didn't share with you last year, but there's 3 early morning blessings that Jews recite when they first wake up. One of them is, thank God for not making me not Jewish. Thank you, God, for not making me a slave. And the third one is, for men, thank you for not making me a woman. Very, very, very appealing. So all 3 of those prayers we found obnoxious in our movement and changed all 3 of them. So now it's not thank you for not making me a non-Jew. It's thank you for making me a Jew. Nothing against non-Jews. I'm just happy to be Jewish. We kind of put all of them, instead of negative, into the positive, right? So instead of saying thank you for not making me a slave, it's thank you for making me a free person, right? Positive. And instead of saying thank you for not making me a woman, for men, we now have for all of us saying thank you for creating me in your image. since both men and women are created in God's image, right? So those are three ways that we tinkered with the original formulas to sort of fit our modern world, but we do that only on occasions where we feel it's necessary to make these kind of changes. And I think hopefully everybody will agree those are nice. By the way, I understand that at United Orthodox Synagogue, which is a modern Orthodox synagogue, they do those three early morning blessings. There's a whole string of about 15 of them. Those are the first three, or some of the first ones. They just do those silently. They don't say them out loud. That's so in the Orthodox world, they don't feel like they can change the formulas. So their solution was, well, let's just not say them out loud. Anyway, that's what I heard. We changed those formulas, but so that's kind of this tension between keva and kavanah. And so let's talk about why prayer in a community is a good thing. There's a few reasons. Having a community to do it together helps us to focus whoops, I can't seem to close this here. There we go. Helps us to focus our attention. Left to our own devices, we might not ever sit down to do this, like exercise or dieting. We also get strength from each other, knowing that's what we're all doing this time together, like going to the gym with a partner. Many of the prayers are actually written in the plural because we're doing this as a community as well as praying as individuals. And so they're written as in the plural language. And since we're praying together, we need a fixed liturgy so everyone can be on the same page. Now, one of the ways to think about this is that many of the prayers are like you can think of them like a shopping list. I actually now have a shopping list because we do all our shopping online now, either at HEB and do the pickup in the parking lot or have somebody deliver it to our home. Since the virus, we haven't been going into supermarkets anymore. So I have a checklist at home. Do we need radishes this week? Do we need celery? Do we need tomatoes? And it kind of reminds me to think about all the things we might need. Prayers are kind of the prayers can be seen sort of in a similar way. They're a checklist of things you might want to say to God. Maybe many of them aren't relevant today, but some of them will be. And so one way to deal with fixed prayers is to focus on the ones that are meaningful to you at this moment and to skip over the ones that are not. And lest you think that's a radical Reformed Jewish thing for me to say, there are some sources. Abraham Joshua Heschel is from our movement, but was raised in a Hasidic world, who said exactly that in his book on Jewish prayer. Some of these prayers will resonate with you right now, and you'll want to spend some time thinking about them. So go ahead and do that, and catch up with everybody when you're ready, and skip over the parts that are not so meaningful to you. That's one strategy for dealing with fixed prayers. One reason for having fixed prayers is that most of us are not wordsmiths. And these prayers are composed by experts like Shakespeare. Shakespeare is a good example for a bunch of reasons. He was brilliant with the English language. He played with it a lot, used a lot of clever imagery and poetry when he wrote his lines. But most of us are not so clever. And so these prayers were written by Jewish Shakespeares who knew the Hebrew language really well, knew the Bible really well, knew Jewish commentaries really well, and took little snippets of Bible and Jewish commentaries and sort of wove together a beautiful mosaic of images with, that had a certain sound to them in the Hebrew language and had a certain flavor. They were very, very cleverly written. Most of us are not so clever. So that's another reason for having these fixed prayers. But it's also a problem because I don't know about you, but when I go to see a Shakespeare play or watch one on TV, it takes a while for my ear to get used to the language. Even though it's English, it's Elizabethan English and it's poetical English. And I have to think about it, especially the poetry, to unpack what Shakespeare was trying to say. Um, and that is the same challenge with the Hebrew prayers. Even Israelis who are fluent in Hebrew, when they open the prayer book, have to think about the words a lot of the times because it's very cleverly, poetically written, and it's not just like spoken Hebrew in Israel. So that's a good and bad, right? It's very clever, it's very literate, but it means that you have to spend some time taking a prayer appreciation class, like a music appreciation class, to really understand what it is they're trying to say sometimes. We do have an English translation on the side of the page, so you have a pretty good idea of what the prayer is about. And our new prayer book, the Sidur Lev Shalem, has a commentary in the margins that also helps to explain what the prayers are about. And I encourage you to use that. Let me just add, by the way, that we will be, you'll be buying your own copy of the Sidur Lev Shalem, which you can mark up. I just bought 20 more of them at the discounted price that the Rabbinical Assembly is selling them for because of the virus. And I'm passing that discount on to you. So including shipping and handling, because I'm buying them in quantity, the shipping is less. It's like $33 a prayer book. So I just ordered 20 of them. I already have 10 in my office. So you can start calling Lisa, my assistant, now if you want to buy one. Because of the virus, we don't, we have to make appointments to make sure there's somebody there to give you the book. But call in advance, let them know when you want to come in to pick it up. And for $33, you get your own prayer book, which you can then mark up and use at home, which is helpful right now to have your own prayer book at home. Okay, so ultimately, here, this last comment over here is, ultimately, it is, of course, essential that we pray from the heart. Kavanah is really essential. You have to add some of your own thoughts to the prayers, not to all of the prayers, but at least to some of them, to be thinking about what you're doing. That's the ideal. So in this conflict, as it were, between Keva and Kavanah, we, of course, want to have Keva so we're all on the same page, but we should also try and have Kavanah. We talked about Hebrew. Before I go into this history of communal worship, let me ask you all, do any of you have any questions so far? Any questions? Okay. I don't know how many of you heard my talk already about the history of Jewish prayer, but if you've heard it before, this will be hopefully a short summary. I'll try and spend only 5 or 10 minutes on it. So the earliest Jewish prayers that we know about are, of course, the Book of Psalms. Well, the first one was Micha Mocha. That's the oldest Jewish prayer in the Bible. That's the prayer that the Israelites sang after they crossed the Red Sea. Even modern Bible scholars who see the Torah as having a long history of being developed and written will tell you that the oldest prayer in the Torah is Micha Mocha Ba'elim Adonai, the song that they sang when they crossed the Red Sea. But other than that, and the Song of Deborah, maybe, the Book of Psalms are the oldest prayers in the Bible. And so it's 150 prayer poems, and most of them almost all of them were written during First Temple times. So now I'm going to give you my little fantasy, right? So the temple, if you haven't, you can look at pictures, you can Google pictures of the Temple Mount today, the way it is today. It was magnificent when it was fully reconstructed by Herod the Great. Herod the Great, by the way, was an insane man, but a wonderful builder. And he used all of the latest Roman technology to build beautiful, spacious edifices all over Israel. So he built something in Caesarea, up in the north of Israel. He built Masada, his summer home or his winter home in the desert, which was built on the side of a big mountain in the middle of nowhere in the desert. And he built this enormous Temple Mount. And if you go to Hebron, which is, I don't recommend it right now, it's kind of a sad place to go, very contentious place in the West Bank where the fervent Jews and the fervent Palestinians hate each other. Sadly. Hebron is the site of the Cave of Machpelah, where, according to tradition, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are buried, as well as Sarah, Rebecca, and Leah, not Rachel. Rachel was buried somewhere else. So the patriarchs are buried there in this cave. Very contentious piece of land. Sad to say, because Abraham, of course, was the father not only of Isaac, but also Ishmael, who the Arabs consider their ancestor as well. And so here the Jews and Arabs are very contentious over a place where their ancestors are buried. But in any case, that being the case, the building that people go to worship there was actually built by Herod the Great. It's not the original cave. It's classic Herodian structure. And in Jerusalem, Herod built this magnificent palatial Temple Mount with a huge temple on top. The temple was completely destroyed by the Romans. But you can imagine if you go there, you'll see how enormous this is, how awesome it must have been to visit the temple in Jerusalem. So what we know is from the Bible is that when the temple would open in the morning for services, people would bring their sacrifices. And there'd be a big line of Jews coming from all over the country, maybe all over the world, to have an audience with God. And in the ancient world, if you were going to have an audience with God, whether you were a pagan or whether you were Jewish, you had to bring a gift, a sacrifice. So you would go to the markets and you'd buy a blemish-free animal and you'd bring it up to the Temple Mount to offer as a sacrifice. Now, it's hard for us to get into this worldview because we don't do that anymore. We haven't done it for 2,000 years. We can kind of imagine what it might have been like. By the way, for vegetarians, I apologize. I'm almost vegetarian myself. We rarely eat meat ourselves, but this was just how people thought back then. So when the temple would open for business, there'd be this long line of people ready to worship God. But before any of them did their worship, the priest would offer a sacrifice on behalf of all of Israel, and that's described in the Torah. And it was the early morning sacrifice. Okay. Then sometime in the afternoon, he would offer another community sacrifice. And in between those two sacrifices, the community sacrifices, individuals bring their own personal sacrifices to God. So if you were working in Tel Aviv on the coast of Israel, it's a new city, but let's pretend it was around 2,000 years ago, and you were working for IBM, and you got a new position at IBM where you're now manager of a new division and a big promotion, more money, and you want to give thanks to God, you would make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem and you would buy an animal. And now I'm going to use my imagination to imagine what the scene would look like. You would go to the priest and he'd ask you what you were there for. And you would say, I'm here because I got a new promotion at IBM and I want to give thanks to God. And the priest would thumb through his 150-page loose leaf notebook of Psalms. He would find a psalm of thanksgiving. He would take it out of the notebook and he would say, here is the words, the song. Take this to the Levite choir and they will sing it for you. And then from the 150-page loose leaf notebook of sheet music, he would pull out the sheet music for that psalm. And he would say, take this to the Levite orchestra and they will play the music while the Levite choir sings the song, right? And then bring your animal over to the priest over there by the altar and he'll sacrifice it for you. So the animal is sacrificed. The choir sings this beautiful, magnificent piece. Presumably it's a multi-part choir with, harmonies and different, notes and so on. Some people sing high, some people sing low. It's a choir. And orchestra includes trumpets and stringed instruments and drums and all kinds of other musical instruments, right? So this is a magnificent production while you're offering your sacrifice. And there's a whole stream of people either asking God's forgiveness or giving thanks to God or praying to God for some special insight or wisdom or who knows what, right? And in between all these individual sacrifices, the first one offered was the community sacrifice, and in the afternoon, a second community sacrifice. Okay, so it's important to know that to understand what happened, how Jewish prayer developed. So by the way, you get right away a little hint of the origin of this keva kavana problem, right? The keva, the fixed liturgy, comes from the idea that there's a sacrifice offered for the whole community. So the whole community has to be in on this deal. And yet kavana, intention, there's individual sacrifices, individual prayers being offered, right, which come from the heart, right? So again, even in this early, stage of Jewish development in the temple, there's this keva kavana conflict. Okay, so in the year 70, the temple is destroyed, and Jews now need to, it's devastating. How do we function without a temple? That was the center of our worship service. That's how we related to God. We'd feel close to God when we were up on the Temple Mount. We can't even go there anymore, let alone offer sacrifice. How do we relate to God without a temple? And in this vacuum, we had what I call the founding fathers of what became Judaism, which I'll talk about on Friday at lunch, by the way. I'll do a little lunch and learn on these guys. So much like America had the founding fathers that created the Constitution, we had sages and scholars who knew the Bible backwards and forwards and Jewish interpretation, and they said, we can use this material, this spiritual material that we've developed from the Bible and its commentaries, to create a rich structure of Jewish rituals that'll function without a temple. And one of the things they had to do was create a structure of prayers, words, that would replace the sacrifices that were brought in the temple. And that's what we're going to talk about today, the words that replace those sacrifices. So now if you go to this, whoops, that's the wrong one. Uh-oh. Okay, hold on one second. Okay, right. Yeah, so now if you go to, so you had this daily sacrifice twice a day. Shacharit was the morning service from the Hebrew word shachar, which means dawn. And mincha was the afternoon service, the afternoon sacrifice that the priest offered on behalf of all the Jews. And so the first thing the rabbis did was they created what they called the Amidah, which comes from the word la'amod, to stand. It's a set of blessings that you recite while you're standing. And this Amidah structure replaced the community sacrifice. So you have an Amidah for Shacharit, for the morning service, and you have an Amidah for Mincha, the afternoon service. That was the first thing they did. Second thing they did was, there's a passage in Deuteronomy that says, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And is followed by, V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, b'chol levavcha, v'chol nafshecha, v'chol me'odecha. You should love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your strength. So that passage, that paragraph is called the Shema. And they attached, and by the way, we'll be talking more about the Shema in a later class session. They attached to that paragraph two other paragraphs from the Torah, one from a later chapter of Deuteronomy, and one from a chapter in the book of Numbers. And they said this collection of three paragraphs from the Torah we should recite twice a day because after it says you should love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your strength, it says, and you should speak about these words when you lie down and when you rise up. So we took it literally and we said we're going to recite these 3 paragraphs twice every day when we lie down in the evening and when we wake up in the morning. And so the evening, the word for evening in Hebrew is Erev. And so the evening service was called Ma'ariv, from Erev, evening. And we recite it again in the morning at Shacharit, at dawn, when the sun comes up. So we recite this Shema, these 3 paragraphs, which the rabbis then encapsulated in blessings before and afterwards. And so this unit called the Shema and its blessings, they would recite twice a day, evening and morning. So we have an Amidah in the morning and afternoon, and the Shema and its blessings in the evening and in the morning. And then the third step was when Jews were getting together in the evening to say the Shema and its blessings, at some point early in Jewish development, probably the 1st century, they said, you know what, it's not really a community service unless we do an Amidah. So even though there wasn't a sacrifice offered in the evening because the temple was closed already, we're going to do another Amidah in the evening to go along with the evening Shema. So now we're saying the Amidah 3 times a day, morning, afternoon, and evening. And we do the Shema along with the Amidah in the evening and in the morning. And then on the Sabbath and festivals and on the new moons, according to the Torah, there was also a community sacrifice that was offered in addition to the Shacharit and Mincha sacrifice. And cleverly enough, in the Jewish tradition, we called the extra sacrifice the extra sacrifice. And in Hebrew, the word for extra is musaf. So it's called the musaf service. And all the Musaf service is pretty much is another Amidah. The Amidah, again, replacing the sacrifice itself. And it's usually attached right to the Shacharit service. So right after Shacharit, the morning service, we do Musaf, the additional sacrifice. Having said all of that, we're saying the same thing several times every day of the week. How do we say the same words all the time and not get more bored? How do we mouth words without, or do we mouth words without thinking about what they mean, right? So that's comes to the question of practical praying. What do we do as a matter of practice so that we can, by the way, there's a chart here. Let me just show you this chart. I didn't include the chart in your, let's see, wait a second. Let me pull up a chart here for you. Okay, so I will, I'll send you this chart. I don't know why I didn't include it before, but let me show you what the chart looks like. Here's a chart of Jewish communal services, right? So along the left column is the name of the service: Shacharit, the morning service; Musaf, the extra one on Sabbath and festivals; Mincha, the afternoon service; and Mariv, the evening service. By the way, this little bracket over here is because rather than get together 3 times a day, it's really hard. It was hard, certainly in the Middle Ages. Jews are working all day long like everybody else. How do you stop in the middle of the day to gather together to do an afternoon service and then go back to work? So what they did was they shoved the afternoon service to the latest possible moment, which is right before sunset. And then the evening service would come right after that, after sunset. So they combined the Mincha Mariv service together around sunset time. And Shacharit and Musaf, as I said before, came together. We do the Shacharit and then the Musaf right after it. So that's what these brackets show, that they were usually combined. So for each of these services, there's kind of a preliminary thing. In the morning, it's very elaborate. And we'll talk a little about this later. The early morning blessings and verses of song. That's these 2 sections here that kind of introduce the Shacharit service. And then you would, and there's no such introduction for Musaf because it's just tacked on to Shachrit. Mincha has a very brief preliminary thing. It's just Psalm 145, which we call Ashrei. And Mariv has an even briefer introduction, just one verse, Vahu Rahum. Then you have the Shema and its blessings, but that only happens in the Shachrit service and in the Mariv service, right? And I've specified what the blessings are in the morning and evening. There's no Shema in the Musaf, no Shema in Mincha. And then the Amidah, which during the weekday has 19 blessings. It's a collection of 19 blessings. On the Sabbath and festivals, it's only 7. And that's what we'll be focusing on in this class, the 7 Sabbath blessings. And it's the same for Musaf, the same for Mincha, the same for Mariv. There's an Amidah in every service. And then a closing prayer, which is usually Aleinu. And then we add a Torah service in the mornings on Monday, Thursday, and Shabbat festivals. The afternoon has a Torah service on Shabbat and Yom Kippur. And the only time we take the Torah scrolls out to read is the evening of Simchat Torah. Okay, so that's the chart. Now let me go back to oh wait, let me go back to. Okay, so how do we pray the same thing over and over again? First of all, realize that every time you pray, doesn't have to be a spiritual high. As with exercise, some days are better than others, but if you're not do it on a regular basis, you won't ever get those spiritual highs, right? The more practice, the better in shape you are, the more likely you are to have a spiritual high more of the time. And if you don't set aside a fixed time to pray, it's likely that you won't at all. So you'll get out of shape, as it were. Another practical step is to use the English translation on this other side of the page and the commentaries in the margins to help you understand the prayers. And of course, this class will also help you to understand what's going on better. Don't be frustrated by the translation. As I often say, I am poetry challenged. Even when reading poetry in English, it takes me a while to figure it out. You will be rewarded if you spend some time thinking about it, and in the class, and reading the commentaries in the prayer book. Another thing you can do is not focus on the details. Look at the forest, not the trees. So what is the theme of the prayer? What is the basic idea the prayer is trying to convey? And then take that theme and think about it in your own terms, right? And that is how you get kavanah, intention, out of the keva, the fixed idea, right? The idea is just the idea of the prayer. It's spelled out in its own clever way by the prayer poet who wrote it. But if you get the theme of what it's about, you can put your own thoughts and words to that theme, and you'll get just as much or maybe more out of the prayer also. And that's one way to add your own thoughts. I find that every time I come to the prayers, something else is going on in my day, in my life, in my thoughts, and I bring those thoughts to the prayers, and every now and then a prayer will trigger something that's actually going on in my world, and I'll say, wow, that speaks to me right now, and it's different than it was yesterday, right? Just like kind of now I'm addicted to watching the news, unfortunately, and even though I hear the same thing over and over again, sometimes it sounds a little differently, it triggers a little different way, it relates a little differently to something I'm thinking. Another thing you can do is bring supplementary reading with you. You didn't hear that from me, a rabbi, but when I was not a rabbi, this is what I would do sometimes. I'd bring a book about Jewish prayer or about Jewish philosophy or something, and when they're reading the Torah or something, I would read that instead. Again, you didn't hear that from me, but it kind of helps you to think about things that you might want to think about anyway while you're in a worship service with other Jews. And now I'm going to tell you the story of St. Peter's Cathedral. Okay, so story of St. Peter's Cathedral. So Diane and I, when she graduated from cantorial school many years ago now, geez, a long time ago, we bought tickets to go to Italy, and we spent 2 weeks in Italy together. And we just bought a tour book, Frommer's, I think it was, with us, and didn't have any plans, right? We got off the plane in Venice, and this is before the internet, so that's how long ago it was. Nowadays, it must be much easier. But we used the tour book or the tourist information there to find a hotel to stay overnight, and the tour book to find places to visit, like St. Mark's Cathedral and whatever else, right? So that's how we toured Italy for 2 weeks. We went to Venice, Florence, and Rome mostly. And when we were in Rome, we went, of course, to the Vatican. So in the Vatican, we went to St. Peter's Cathedral, which is the enormous, magnificent structure that Michelangelo created. He was an architect as well as a painter, and he figured out how to create a freestanding dome, the largest of its size at the time, and then decorated the dome on the inside with paintings. And he painted these beautiful paintings of biblical scenes on the inside of the cupola of St. Peter's Cathedral. So we were there, and I was much younger back then, and I made Diane climb all the staircases. She was not too enthusiastic about this, but we climbed all the staircases to get up to the very top of the cupola so we could see Michelangelo's paintings up there, which were magnificent. However, if you didn't climb all those steps, which almost nobody did back in Michelangelo's day, you wouldn't see those paintings. And thousands of people would come in to hear the Pope preach in St. Peter's and never saw those paintings. So the question is, why did Michelangelo paint them? And in the tour book, it said, Michelangelo wasn't painting for the people in the pews. Michelangelo was painting for God. And what he did was he took God's word, this is how he understood it, right? The Bible, and he transformed it into his medium as a painting. And then he gave it back to God as a gift to God, which is why he put it way up in the cupola, because back then people thought God was up there somewhere, right? So it's closer to God. And it was enough, according to the tour guide, the tour book that we read, it was enough for the people in the pews to know that the greatest artist of their age had painted these beautiful paintings as a gift to God. They didn't actually have to see them. They just knew that he did this. And that was enough for them. And Diane is actually the one who came up with this analogy. I didn't come up with it. But the prayers in the prayer book were written by poetic Michelangelos, people who were wordsmiths, brilliant poets and scholars who took God's word, the Bible, as understood by rabbinic commentaries, and would take these little snippets of pieces and create beautiful mosaic images from all these little snippets and create a whole new picture and vision, which is really beautiful and cleverly crafted as a way of taking God's word and giving it back to God as a gift, as a sacrifice. Remember, the prayers are replacing sacrifices. And so these beautiful poems were written as sacrifices to God that and we assume, again, I'm married to a cantor, so I very much appreciate the value of music. Music speaks to the human soul in ways even poetry doesn't. People who are sick can be so spiritually moved just by hearing music that they like, right? Music just reaches people in a deep and profound way. These poems were not just read, they were sung. And unfortunately, we don't know the music that was written, but I'm assuming it was beautiful music. And the people in the pews heard the music, and that spoke to them, even if they didn't understand the words. There's a raging debate in scholarly discussion, Jewish scholars, about Jewish prayers. Some people say, oh, Jews back then were so smart. they didn't have distractions like TV and the internet and video games. So they memorized the Bible. And when a poet quoted an obscure word from the Bible, everybody knew the word he was referring to and the place it was found in the book, because people were so smart back then. The rest of us, now I'm kind of cluing you in as to which side of this debate I'm on, the rest of us say, nonsense. Jews were not any more literate necessarily then than they are now. They know about the Bible, they know Bible stories, they may have read the Bible, but they're not scholars of the Bible. And there's no way they would have known all these obscure references to the Bible and commentaries. There's no way they would have understood the beautiful imagery that this guy is trying to create. So then why did he write this complicated poetry? He wasn't writing it for the people in the pews. He was writing it for God, as a gift to God. And it was enough for the people in the pews to know that the most brilliant poet of their day, whether it was Yanai or Kalonymus or one of the other major poets in Jewish history of the early centuries, these amazing poets had written this beautiful piece of poetry. That's all they had to know. Shakespeare had written this poet as a gift to God. And it sounds beautiful because I can hear the music. And it must be beautiful because I can understand kind of some of the words. I mean, again, Jews didn't necessarily know Hebrew back then either so well, right? So we're not so different than our ancestors. If you're having trouble understanding the prayers in the Hebrew, you're not so different than your ancestors. But they were written by brilliant people. And if you study them, you can unpack them and understand their meaning. But in the meantime, you can be moved by the music and by the themes, which are clearly there, and the translations capture the themes of the prayers. And it can move you, and you can understand that part of this is it's a gift to God. It's a way of us expressing our own thoughts on the waves of this beautiful poetry and music that were created for us on behalf of us as a way of lifting our prayers up to God. So so that's another way to think about Jewish prayers. Let me see if there's anything else I wanted to talk about here. St. Peter's Cathedral. Keep the goal in mind, to come closer to your Creator, to come closer to your family, friends, and community. That's why we gather together when we're going to be able to after this virus is over. And at least now we can gather together on the internet in a way. And to remind yourself what isn't truly important, right? This is the last thing I want to say about this. One of the reasons for having these prayers, like any ritual, rituals are designed for us to do on a regular basis, to do it regularly, so that it reminds us of goals, aspirations, ideals, and values that we have. That's what the rituals are for. Like putting a mezuzah on the doorpost of your house, right? The little passage from the Bible that says, God is one and we should love God with all our heart, soul, and might. We put on the doorpost of our house. What's the purpose of the ritual? So every time we pass by the doorpost on our way out into the world, or when we pass by coming back home again, we're reminded that there's one God in the world. And when we're out and about in the world, or when we're home with our families, it reminds us of the importance of life, God, our family, our community, and doing God's will in the world, being good people. Putting it on the doorpost of your house reminds you of your responsibilities, right? The problem with rituals is that once we put it up on the doorpost of our house, unless we're thoughtful when we pass the doorpost, we won't even notice it. We won't remember it. And the same thing with prayers. If we get used to doing them just by rote every day, day after day, we may not stop and think about the words, right? The fact that we do it every day is the trigger to remind ourselves of what's important. But unless we think about the words, we won't, right? So the ritual loses its value because it's repetitive, or might lose its value because it's repetitive. But it's repetitive because we need to be constantly reminded. So it only works when we stop and think about it, right? So the purpose of the prayers is to stop and think about it. And we just have to remember to stop and think about it when we're doing the prayers. So that's where I'll kind of end with that thought. Do you have any questions for me about anything we said so far? So what we're going to do in the next, as you can see from the schedule, is we're going to zoom in closer on certain blessings in the Amidah, the paragraphs of the Shema, and the blessings that come before and after it, and some of the other elements of the prayer service, so we can kind of unpack a little bit the poetry and meaning of what the prayers are, so we can understand better what they're trying to get us to think about. And then in the later classes, we'll talk about, again, the Torah portion that is for the service in May that we'll be leading. You're not obligated to be part of that service if you don't want to be, but anybody who would like to be part of it, we'll figure out a way to work everybody in. Okay, any other questions? Okay, well, so thank you for joining us. Hopefully you'll enjoy the class, and in May we'll have a nice service, and I'm assuming that by May we'll be able to be in the building again, but if not, we'll be doing it online, or we'll figure out a way to do it. We're getting good at this. Okay, thank you all for joining us, and I'll see you again next week.
Bye.
Bye.